Hi everyone. Tonight, we're going to start with a celebration that turned into something else entirely. Imagine blowing out the candles on your 75th birthday cake, surrounded by soft music, clinking glasses, polite laughter, and then catching a whisper that chills your spine more than the champagne ever could. You probably won't survive a moment like that unchanged. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And, as always, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise. And let's get started tonight. The evening had all the hallmarks of refinement. Crystal glasses sparkled under ambient lighting. My name delicately etched into every place card. The catering was impeccable. The string quartet well rehearsed. And the whole thing had been organized by my son, James, my only child, and, for a while, the person I trusted more than anyone on earth. The celebration took place inside the home I'd designed myself nearly 4 decades ago. Back when I still believed in permanence, I'd selected every piece of molding, every window angle, with an architect's precision and a mother's dreams. Now, I barely recognized it. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, had been remodeling it room by room since moving in, turning it into something slick and soulless, like one of those sterile lifestyle influencer lofts, where you couldn't tell if someone actually lived there or just occasionally posed in the kitchen. During the evening, I excused myself from a conversation about Chicago's new skyline, what a tragic mess that is, by the way, and made my way toward the guest bathroom. My knees were acting up again. A creaky protest that had been worsening since my sister Elaine's sudden passing. As I passed James's study, I heard voices. "I hope this is her last birthday," Rebecca said. The words were casual, effortless, like she was commenting on the weather. I could hear the smile in her voice, the clink of her champagne glass. I've already got the design drafted for when we turn her studio into a dream closet. Shoe wall, vanity nook, the works. I froze. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was how routine it sounded. Not the kind of thing you say in a moment of passion. This was scheduled malice. I leaned against the wall, heart racing, not from age, but from disbelief. Then James spoke. "Patience? Darling, the doctor says her heart won't last much longer once it happens. The estate's all ours, just a little longer." They laughed. My son laughed. In that moment, I learned something older people don't always admit. Wisdom doesn't always shield you. You can be 75, with a lifetime of trophies and architectural awards, and still get blindsided in your own hallway. I didn't confront them, didn't cry. I straightened my spine, an old habit from my days in boardrooms full of men who didn't believe a woman could design skyscrapers, and went back to my guests. When James raised a toast to the best mother a son could ask for, I smiled. I even clinked my glass. It wasn't fake. It was armor. Here's something no one tells you until you're older. Rage can be quiet. It doesn't always come with screaming or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes with silence, clarity, and a very precise to-do list. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling I'd once calculated the angles of by hand. No computer renderings back then, just rulers, pencils, and raw certainty. Rebecca's words echoed. James's tone, the click of their glasses. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were planning around it. I wasn't confused. My memory wasn't fading. I wasn't weak. They had simply decided I was disposable. Old age fact. Here's one. Your bones might betray you, but your instincts usually don't. I've read somewhere that dolphins can sleep with half their brain awake. Maybe mothers are the same. Maybe part of me had been awake all along, watching my son grow into a man who smiled at my pain, just waiting for proof. Anyway, the next morning, I brewed my own tea. I waited until the house emptied. James off to some development meeting, Rebecca heading to a wellness event in athleisure. They were always busy, too busy to notice when a storm was forming under their roof. I went to my studio, the one Rebecca had already mentally converted into a shoe closet, and stared at the blueprints still pinned to my drafting wall. I was 75 years old. I had a weak heart on paper, a fading public presence, and apparently a countdown over my head. But I also had something else. I had a brain trained to build under pressure, and I had absolutely nothing left to lose. That morning, I made a call. Not to the police. Not yet. I dialed a number I hadn't used in a decade. A voice answered. Victor Morales, he said, still deep, still confident. It was like hearing a ghost put on a suit and sit up straight. My throat caught, but I managed. It's Caroline. There was silence. Then, I'm listening, and just like that, my second life began. Quirky fact. You can actually train pigeons to recognize impressionist paintings. They do better than toddlers in some studies. Wild, right? Anyway, this isn't about pigeons. This is about survival. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of fear, no. That was long gone. But because of something even more restless. Clarity. You ever have one of those nights where your mind's sharper than usual? Like your body's tired, but your soul just finished a triple shot of espresso. That was me, wide awake at 3:00 am, staring at my ceiling, replaying that conversation I'd overheard until it burned into the back of my eyelids. People always say aging makes you fragile. That's a lazy assumption. It makes you efficient. You don't have time to waste on emotional spirals. You see a crack in the wall. You either fix it or plan around it collapsing. That's it. No self-pity. No drama. So I started planning. My mind worked the way it always had. Structurally, every problem was a building. Every betrayal, a design flaw to be rebalanced. But unlike steel and stone, human relationships come with their own sneaky variables, especially when one of those humans shares your DNA. James had always been ambitious. Even as a child, he was never satisfied. First place wasn't enough. He wanted the trophy to have his name engraved before the ceremony even started. When he was 8, he rewired his science fair project to make the volcano spew glitter. Everyone loved it. He told the judges I helped. He always needed a narrative where he was the underdog. Problem was, I'd worked my whole life to be more than a background character in someone else's story. Still, I wasn't blind. I'd seen signs, little ones. How James took over paying my bills after Elaine died, saying the apps are confusing. Mom. How he started attending my doctor's appointments, nodding along while Dr. Harrison, a man I'd never chosen, read off results I never asked for. It was like someone had put me in a glass box, labeled handle with care, preferably while sedated. Old age wisdom. People don't take power from you all at once. They inch into it, kindly, helpfully, with soft smiles and good intentions. By the time you notice, your hands are off the wheel and they've changed the destination. But here's what James and Rebecca forgot. I'm an architect. We don't just design beauty, we solve chaos. We manage tension, we reinforce under pressure. You can't survive 5 decades in this field without learning how to hold your ground when the walls start to crack. The morning after the party, I sat in my studio, surrounded by blueprints of buildings I'd shaped into existence. Real things. Towers that still cast shadows. My heart thudded a little fast, maybe from adrenaline, maybe from anger, but I focused. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. A clean reveal needed patience. A structural takedown. That needed strategy. And humor. Imagine being taken out by your own mother's planning skills while you're busy designing her funeral closet. That's irony with a leather handle. That's when I thought of Martha. Martha had been with me longer than some of my relationships. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the last person in my life who remembered when I was still Caroline the upstart architect, not Caroline the retired widow. She'd held my hand when I collapsed from pneumonia. She'd helped dress Elaine for her burial. She was loyalty in orthopedic shoes. So I waited until she brought in my tea tray, a daily ritual involving chamomile, shortbread, and a check-in that felt maternal, no matter who was technically older. Martha, I said, my voice quieter than usual. I need to tell you something terrible, and I need your help. She froze. And then something incredible happened. Her eyes didn't widen with fear. They narrowed with readiness. I've seen how they've been changing your medications, she said, without missing a beat. The bottles never match the labels. The pills have changed shape. I thought I was losing my mind, or that maybe you were. And I was too scared to ask. Whatever you need, she added, setting the tray down. I'm with you. You know how some buildings have secret structural supports hidden behind the walls? Martha was that quiet, load-bearing, essential. An hour later, she handed me a burner phone. No questions, no fuss. I called Victor. Now, let me pause and say this. Victor Morales is a name you probably wouldn't recognize unless you've been in architecture circles for the last 40 years. He was once the name in sustainable urban design. Brilliant, charming, and absolutely terrible at folding laundry. He was also the man I almost married before I chose James's father instead. It's funny how one choice, just one, can ripple across decades. We'd designed entire urban models together, back when Chicago still cared about walkable neighborhoods and rooftop gardens. Then I fell in love with the wrong man at the right time, and Victor and I ended. I hadn't spoken to him in 10 years, not out of bitterness, but because some doors close with dignity. Until now. Victor, I said when he answered. It's Caroline. The silence on the other end was thick. Then, his voice. Is this a social call or a warning? I laughed. Couldn't help it. Neither, I said. I need help. And I think you'll want to hear what I have to say about the Urban Hub project. I could practically hear him sit up straighter. You're still working on that. Let's just say I'm dusting off the blueprints. Quirky fact. In 1989, a pigeon named Cher Ami was posthumously awarded the French Croix de Guerre for saving nearly 200 soldiers in WWI. No medals for Martha yet, but honestly, she deserves one. Victor was quiet again. Then, tell me everything. And so I did. Not the feelings that came later, but the facts. How James had taken over. How the medications had changed. How Rebecca was rehearsing her victory closet speech in the next room. I need a way out. I finished. Not just escape. Justice. Structure. Victor exhaled sharply. Caroline, this isn't just elder abuse. This is attempted homicide. I know, I said. That was the moment it stopped being a theory. That was the moment the sketch became a floor plan. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was architecture? Victor didn't hesitate. He asked questions like a lawyer in a courtroom, rapid, specific, and slightly annoyed that I'd let things get this far without calling him sooner. That was just his way. He was never sentimental until the work was done. Then he'd buy you flowers or name a plaza after you. I appreciated that about him. What's your current physician's name again? He asked. Dr. Harrison, not Leonard. James insisted I switch. Said Leonard was old-fashioned and didn't keep up with the latest cardiology research. Victor snorted. And you believed him. I was grieving Elaine. I wasn't thinking straight. And that was the truth. My sister's death had carved a canyon through me. She died suddenly, an aneurysm in the middle of a phone call. We'd been talking about replacing the kitchen backsplash. I remember I was holding a tile sample shaped like a tiny honeycomb when the line went quiet. Grief doesn't knock politely. It breaks down the door, floods the hallway, and quietly rewires your ability to trust your own instincts. James had shown up the next day with flowers and a promise. You don't have to do this alone. He cooked my meals, sorted my accounts, handled the funeral arrangements. He even held my hand during the eulogy when my voice broke. Looking back now, I don't think it was support. I think it was training. First, he helped me with my email, then my bank passwords, then the confusing health insurance portals. And I let him because he was my son, because he said all the right things, because he brought me chamomile tea when I couldn't sleep, because, if we're being brutally honest, I wanted to be taken care of. There's an old-age truth we don't talk about enough. Sometimes it feels like a relief to let someone else drive, especially when you've been behind the wheel your whole life. But if you're not careful, you'll wake up in the trunk. Victor, to his credit, didn't lecture me. He just said, we need evidence, not stories, not suspicions, evidence. And that's when I became useful again. Because if I can draft a 60-story LEED-certified tower during a heat wave, I can certainly document a murder plot disguised as eldercare. We started small. Martha collected the pill bottles. She noticed the prescription labels didn't match the pills inside. So she began logging the differences in a little black notebook she kept hidden behind the broom closet. Martha, by the way, is exactly the kind of person you want in your corner. She has the quiet intensity of someone who's ironed a lot of power suits and seen too many things go wrong in real time. Meanwhile, I began hiding the pills under my tongue. James always stood there while I swallowed them, glass of water in hand. Concern etched on his face like a well-practiced expression from a daytime soap. But I'm the widow of an actor. My late husband taught me more than I realized specifically, how to fake swallow convincingly. I could have done community theatre if I weren't so obsessed with glass curtain walls and solar panels. I built a stash of untouched pills inside a hollowed-out architectural history book. Fitting. Really hiding poison in the pages of a legacy they tried to erase. Victor coordinated the next step, reconnecting me with Dr. Leonard. The physician James had insisted I abandon. Leonard met me at a discreet private practice in Evanston. Martha drove. We used an old Toyota she borrowed from her nephew, no GPS. No tracking. No online record of the visit. Leonard ran the full workup. EKG. Blood work. Neurological screening. The results were swift and devastating. Your heart is perfectly fine, he said. Stronger than mine, frankly. But your symptoms, tremors, memory gaps, exhaustion, those aren't from age. They're classic signs of anticholinergic poisoning. Combined with benzodiazepines in certain doses, you're being slowly shut down from the inside. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just nodded. I already knew. I have to report this, Leonard said. Face tight. Not yet, I said. If they find out I know, they'll speed up their timeline. I need time. I need backup. He agreed, reluctantly, to give me 3 weeks. Academic debate phrase. Here's one. The ethics of delaying formal medical reporting in service of a broader strategic exposure remain highly contested. In other words, was I wrong to wait? Maybe. But justice that arrives too early can collapse under its own weight. Back at the house, I resumed my role, the frail, fading mother, the half-present woman with good days and bad days. I even leaned into the performance, dropped a glass here and there, paused mid-sentence, let my eyes drift blankly during dinner. You seem better, James said one evening, scrutinizing my face as he handed me the pills. I let my hand tremble and spilled a little water. Just a moment of clarity, I suppose, I said softly. They come and go. He smiled, satisfied, like a butcher watching the roast settle. That night, I sat at my drafting table and examined the pill I'd smuggled from my mouth. I studied it like I would a new building material, checking color, weight, texture. Every detail counted, every element part of a future case file. It's funny. You think the worst betrayal is being lied to, but the real devastation comes from being underestimated. James and Rebecca didn't just try to kill me. They tried to do it quietly, with my own silence as the accomplice. So I made a new plan, not a building this time, a trap. There's a particular feeling that comes with placing the first call of your new life. It's not dramatic. There's no music swell, no thunderclap. It's just quiet, focused. Like when you line up the edge of a blueprint with your drafting table and everything clicks into place. That's how I felt dialing Victor for the second time. I was back in my studio, the one Rebecca had earmarked for her fantasy walk-in closet. Sunlight filtered through the geometric windows I'd once designed for thermal efficiency. The air smelled faintly of cedar and betrayal. Victor answered before the second ring. "Tell me you're ready," he said. "I'm ready." We kept it short. He was already lining up a private investigator, an ex-cop, who specialized in financial crimes against seniors. Meanwhile, Martha would continue her quiet surveillance inside the house. And me, I had a new job, act frail, stash pills, and stay invisible. But even with all that set in motion, something still gnawed at me, a weight I hadn't unpacked. It wasn't just the poisoning, it was the why. The emotional scaffolding that held up my entire life had cracks I hadn't noticed until now. That evening, after James and Rebecca left for a charity event, I believe it was for women in urban development, which is ironic on a cosmic level. Martha brought me a tray of tea and sat down across from me like she knew I needed company. "I want to tell you something," I said. "I already know," she replied. "Not the pills, something else." I told her about Victor, about how we'd met in grad school, how we'd spent 2 years designing what we thought would change city planning forever. A sustainable, walkable complex called the Urban Hub. We had renderings, models, even a pitch deck printed on recycled cardstock before that was trendy. And then I walked away. For James's father. For the idea of family. He was the safe choice, I said, staring into my tea. Stable, familiar. He liked me more when I was smaller, quieter. He never knew what to do with a woman who won awards. Martha didn't reply. She didn't have to. Her silence was better than most people's sympathy. "You ever regret it?" she asked after a long pause. I nodded. Sometimes. Not for the child we made, but for the version of myself I buried. She placed her hand over mine. "You're unburying her now." We sat there, 2 women surrounded by silence and secrets, and I felt something shift. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the foundation of it. The next morning, I woke early. James was still asleep. His schedule conveniently inconsistent lately, plenty of important investor meetings and golf appointments, which I now assumed were code for embezzling. I opened my closet, reached for the red box buried behind old sweaters, and pulled out a business card. Thick stock, embossed text. Carrington Urban Development Group, 3 months before my birthday. I'd received an unsolicited invitation from Carrington to consult on a revised version of the Urban Hub concept. At the time, I'd declined politely, vaguely, because I believed my health wouldn't allow it. Now, I knew better. My decline had been part fiction, part pharmaceutical engineering. I texted Victor. "Still have that Carrington contact." His response came with lightning speed. Howard Carrington himself. "You want to take the meeting?" "Yes." I typed, "Under one condition. They don't know I'm sick." "You're not," he replied. "You know, it's strange how memory works. I can't always remember where I put my reading glasses, but I still recall the exact angle of every corner I designed in this house. I even remember the paint formula I used in the study Storm Grey, with 7% white added to soften the tone. And as I stood in that very study later that day, I noticed something new. The tiny security camera Michael Donovan had installed in the overhead lighting. Invisible, unless you knew it was there. He'd set up 6 of them throughout the house. During a weekend, James and Rebecca were away at some wine-tasting retreat. The cameras were small, wireless, and clever embedded in old fixtures I had designed myself, and because I knew every inch of this house better than anyone else. I knew exactly where to hide microphones too. Over the next few days, the system picked up everything. Rebecca on the phone with the designer. Yes, it's technically still her space, but we'll gut it as soon as we get the estate. James in the kitchen. Her tremors are stronger this week. Might be time to increase the dosage. And my favorite, Dr. Harrison's voice over speakerphone. "Careful. We can't push too fast. You don't want her in the hospital. You want her in the ground." It was chilling, clinical, like they were discussing drywall, academic debate phrase. There's an ongoing conversation in medical ethics about the subtle transition from palliative care to passive euthanasia. This wasn't that. This was weaponized caretaking. We backed up the audio, sent copies to Leonard, Victor, and the investigator. We were building our case piece by piece. And in the meantime, I kept playing the part of the fading matriarch, lost in a maze of her own memories. Except I wasn't lost. I was blueprinting my exit. Quirky fact. The Eiffel Tower can grow over 6 inches in the summer because of heat expansion. Bodies under pressure do the same thing, metaphorically, that week, while James clicked through real estate listings on my laptop, searching for beach homes for the future. I stared at him with a new lens. He was already spending my legacy. Good. Let him think he was winning. Because I'd already designed the trap that would collapse his entire plan. Mornings became my favorite time, not for peace, not for coffee, but because James and Rebecca always left early. Their absence created a rare, sacred quiet. No fake concern, no hovering. Just me, Martha, and the walls I once built. And oh, The irony, they thought this house made me weak. They didn't realize it gave me an edge. I knew every air duct, every hidden crawl space, every shortcut behind the paneling. When you've spent 50 years designing structures, you see things most people overlook. So while James thought I was watching morning talk shows, I was documenting my own attempted murder. The pills I'd saved were neatly organized in a locked drawer, disguised as a row of architectural magazines. Martha labeled each one with the date, time, and dosage. She even noted if James had been watching or distracted. Her handwriting was small and neat, like a librarian cataloguing a very illegal archive. Meanwhile, Michael Donovan, the former detective Victor had hired, had begun digging through our financials. James had transferred over $2 million to offshore accounts, steady withdrawals, cleverly hidden behind shell companies. I'd unknowingly funded his ambition, and my own disappearance. He also traced Rebecca's past. I wasn't surprised by what he found, but it still hit me in the gut. 5 years ago, Michael said during a covert meeting in a service elevator, Rebecca was investigated for financial abuse involving an elderly woman in Boston. The case was dropped when the victim died unexpectedly. Let me guess, I muttered. Natural causes. Heart failure. Similar symptoms. I leaned against the elevator wall, letting the cold steel calm my skin. So my son married a professional con artist. Seems like it. Old age wisdom. You stop being surprised when people disappoint you. What hurts is when they confirm the very thing you hoped wasn't true. And yet, I wasn't broken. I was alert, activated, like a structural support that had finally remembered its load-bearing purpose. James, as usual, underestimated me. He forgot that buildings don't collapse quietly. They groan. They shift. They warn you before they fall. I spent the next week pretending to be confused about basic tasks. James, how do I open the online banking app again? I'd ask sweetly. He'd roll his eyes, then walk me through it, controlling the mouse himself. Of course, every keystroke he made became part of my evidence. Every patronizing sigh, every little slip when he said, "Don't worry about this page. It's not important," told me exactly what was important. Martha kept watch. I kept smiling. We were quiet scaffolding beneath a crumbling facade. Victor called nightly. He'd check in with a calm tone that I clung to like a rope. "How's your energy?" He'd ask. "Tired," I'd say, but clear. And it was true. 3 weeks of real medication covertly provided by Leonard through Martha had started reversing the damage. My tremors were still there, especially late in the day, but the fog in my head had begun to lift. My balance returned, slowly but steadily. I began sketching again, at first, just for therapy, little pencil lines, familiar angles. But then I found myself working on something more than doodles, the urban hub concept. The one Victor and I had abandoned decades ago. Back then, we imagined a living space that would restore dignity to city life. Walkable paths, accessible architecture, integrated mental health centers, family daycare units next to co-working spaces, a place built around people, not profit. Maybe it was poetic, or maybe I just needed a project that made me feel like more than a body in a chair. Carrington is excited, Victor told me one night. They're ready to meet in person. Not yet, I said. Not until after I burn my old house down, metaphorically. Of course, quirky fact. The first recorded architect was a man named Imhotep in ancient Egypt. He designed the step pyramid and also served as a doctor. Imagine being so good you were the building and the hospital. Anyway, back to the poison. One morning, James brought me a fresh set of pills, except this time there was a new one, slightly green, a bit larger. "What's this?" I asked. "Just a supplement. Dr. Harrison says it's for circulation. Might help your legs." My legs, which he thought were weakening again. I nodded. "Thank you, sweetheart." I didn't swallow it. Instead, I slipped it under my tongue, excused myself to the bathroom, and placed it in a Ziploc bag Martha had waiting. She labeled it like a crime scene tech. Later that day, Michael had the pill analyzed. His message came in 3 hours. Increased dosage of the same medication. This will speed up heart and kidney damage. They're accelerating. So were we. Richard Anderson, a ruthless elder law attorney in Chicago, agreed to take my case. He was sharp, a little arrogant. But I liked that. He didn't treat me like a fragile thing. This is attempted homicide, he said, flipping through the files I'd given him. I know, I replied. And you're choosing not to go to the police yet. Not until I've made it airtight. They've spent months discrediting me to everyone. If I go now, I look like a paranoid old woman. But if I wait, if I launch at just the right time, I become undeniable. Richard nodded. I've seen worse cases. I've seen better survivors. Then he looked at the urban hub sketch I'd left on the table. This yours? Yes, it's good, he said, studying it. Real good. Wait until you see what I do to my will, I said with a smile. That afternoon, I called Carrington myself. Mr. Carrington, I said. I'd like to revisit our conversation. His voice brightened. Mrs. Weber, I was hoping you'd say that. I spent the next 2 days finalizing the paperwork to transfer my estate into a non-profit foundation, the Weber Foundation for Young Architects. Victor helped me set it up. Martha signed as a witness. My house, the one James thought he'd inherit, was now owned by a trust that couldn't be touched, contested, or dissolved without triggering federal oversight. It was perfect. All I had to do was wait. By the time April rolled around, I'd mastered the art of invisible resistance. I played the role of the gradually fading matriarch so well. I should have won an Emmy granted, in the best performance. While actively sabotaging your own murderers category, James brought my pills every evening with that same rehearsed tenderness. Here you go, Mom, he'd say, handing me a glass of water like it was communion. I'd fake swallow, nod slowly, and let my hands shake just enough to reassure him that yes, his plan was still working. The pills, both the originals and the green ones, were piling up in that hollowed-out architecture book on my drafting shelf. The irony never escaped me. A book called Modern Structural Collapse now hid the tools of my survival. Meanwhile, the surveillance system hummed along silently, capturing every whispered conversation, every damning admission. Every time Rebecca said things like, I don't want to rush, but I've already chosen the carpet for the new closet. It was logged and labeled by Michael Donovan like the world's darkest screenplay. And oh, the things we heard. One Thursday evening, I listened to a recording while sipping real chamomile tea, because now I actually had medication that didn't make me hallucinate my high school locker combination. James was on the phone with Dr. Harrison. She's asking about updating her will, James said, sounding nervous. There was a pause. Then Harrison's voice. Do you want me to adjust her medication again? We may need to. The Westridge deal is closing in 6 weeks, and I need access to that capital. Then be careful. Harrison warned. We're already at maximum tolerable doses. A sudden collapse could raise flags. You want a quiet decline, not a scandal. That recording was added to the ever-growing file we nicknamed Operation Sandcastle, because James was about to watch his kingdom dissolve under one well-placed wave. That week, Victor and I met at his penthouse to prepare for the final stage. He opened the door and blinked at me. You cut your hair. Noticed. Did you? I smiled, running a hand over the sleek new bob gone with the soft, grandmotherly curls James had always preferred. Now, I looked more like myself again. Clean lines, unapologetic edges. You look like you just won a Pritzker, he said. I look like I'm done pretending to be dead. We reviewed documents, timing, guest lists. Carrington's team would be at the Palmer Club dinner. So would Elizabeth Chen, the assistant district attorney who had quietly agreed to review my case file. Martha was handling the RSVPs now, officially working as my assistant. Since the foundation papers had been finalized, her days of laundering sheets had ended the moment she became the administrative director of a non-profit. A well-deserved upgrade, old age wisdom. Titles don't define you, but sometimes giving someone a new one unlocks a part of them that was always waiting to be seen. Back at the house, Rebecca decided to bond. She knocked on my studio door one afternoon, a thing she hadn't done in months. Caroline, she said, voice syrupy. I was thinking, next month marks the anniversary of your first major commission. right? What if we celebrated something elegant? James just joined the Palmer Club, and we could host a dinner there in your honor. Now, if I hadn't already known what she was planning, this might have come off sweet. But I'd seen the blueprints, the emails, the plans to gut my studio and list the house the moment I was gone. Still, I played my part. How thoughtful of you, dear, I said, letting my voice wobble like a tragic sitcom grandma. That sounds lovely. She beamed. May 15th. Pencil it in. I already had. In ink. Later that evening, I texted Martha. They've picked the date for their own destruction. May 15th. She replied with a thumbs up emoji and a knife. Subtle. Victor and I began final prep. Richard, the attorney, fine-tuned the estate transfer, ensuring the foundation's ownership was bulletproof. Elizabeth Chen confirmed the presence of plainclothes officers at the Palmer Club, just in case James or Rebecca decided to get creative under pressure. Meanwhile, the Urban Hub project moved forward. Carrington's people had reviewed my updated sketches and responded with enthusiasm usually reserved for Oscar winners and newborns. This is exactly the kind of vision we need right now, Howard Carrington told me during a secure call. Your legacy is about to expand in ways that have nothing to do with family trees. I loved that. Not mother of, not widow of, but Caroline Weber, architect. Quirky fact. In the original drafts of the U.S.C. Constitution, the word pursuit was almost replaced with attainment. Imagine that. The right to the attainment of happiness. Way more pressure. Don't you think? That weekend, James and Rebecca left for Milwaukee to attend another gala this time. Something about sustainable luxury housing, which is a phrase that makes about as much sense as eco-friendly private jets. Michael took the opportunity to enhance the surveillance system. More backup, more storage, encrypted cloud uploads. By now, we had over 80 hours of audio and 40 videos. Enough for a documentary. Or at the very least, a Netflix miniseries titled Murder by Inheritance, The Weber Files. And the pièce de résistance? James began pushing for a will update. I've been thinking, I said one morning, stirring my oatmeal like I'd forgotten what spoons were for. Maybe it's time to update the documents. Just in case something happens. He perked up instantly. I can call Henderson tomorrow, he said, referencing his sketchy golf buddy, not my longtime attorney. Whatever you think is best. Dear, I murmured, after he left the room. I tucked the day's pills into their usual hiding spot. I felt tired, genuinely tired. The poison still lingered in my body, and the act was exhausting. But we were so close, and like any good build, the final phase had to be the cleanest, academic debate phrase. The intersection of medical coercion and estate manipulation constitutes a complex nexus of elder abuse, necessitating interdisciplinary legal interpretation, translation. James and Rebecca were about to meet consequences they didn't even know existed. On May 1st, exactly 2 weeks before the dinner, I stood in front of my closet for a solid hour trying to choose what to wear, not for the event itself, but for the final meeting at Victor's penthouse, where we would put every last screw into place. That's when it hit me. Clothes are just like buildings. You don't just wear them. You inhabit them. You send a message with every seam, every drape, every cut. James had always preferred I dress soft. Cream cardigans, pastels, something age-appropriate. A vibe. Rebecca once described it as cozy matriarch realness during a Christmas party, and I almost dumped eggnog on her designer pumps. So I picked a crimson dress, not burgundy, not wine, crimson, strong, architectural, with a square neckline that made my collarbones look like design elements. I paired it with sensible heels, low enough to hide the tremors, but high enough to remind people I could still stand tall. My silver hair, once worn in those grandmotherly waves James liked so much, was now sharp, shoulder length, and unapologetically professional. Victor looked up from his laptop as I stepped into his penthouse's sunroom. Wow, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Too much. No, he said slowly. They won't recognize you. Good, I replied. That's the point. The next 3 hours were spent rehearsing the timing, reviewing documents, and confirming seating arrangements for the Palmer Club dinner. I wanted Elizabeth Chen at my table, flanked by Carrington's team and one of the Foundation's new board members, James and Rebecca, of course, would sit directly across from me. A perfect view. "This is war," Victor said, not unkindly. "It's justice," I corrected. "The difference is subtle, but structural, old-age wisdom. Style is more than surface. It's strategic." 3 days before the dinner, I met with Elizabeth in her office downtown. She looked like the kind of woman who drinks coffee cold and never needs a second draft. We went over the entire case, medical reports, financial fraud, surveillance footage, statements from Martha and Dr. Leonard, and Michael's findings. "This is solid," she said. "But we're not arresting anyone at the dinner. That's not how we operate." "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "Just keep them contained. I want their downfall to be social, not just legal." She nodded, understanding instantly. "You want everyone to see them for what they are?" "Yes, in real time." That night, back at Victor's penthouse, Martha helped me prepare. She insisted I wear the pearl necklace my mother gave me when I graduated from Columbia. The same necklace Rebecca once pointed to and said, "Oh, I've always loved that one. I'd wear it all the time after, well, you know, subtle, like a hammer." Martha fastened the clasp with steady hands. "They won't know what hit them," she whispered. Quirky fact. "The color red has been proven to enhance perception of dominance in competitive situations. In other words, alpha energy, but make it satin." Finally, May 15th arrived, the day of reckoning. I watched from the upstairs window as James and Rebecca stood at the Palmer Club entrance, greeting guests with champagne smiles and polished lies. They looked radiant, relaxed. They had no idea. Victor's car pulled up quietly. I stepped out, legs shaky but determined. My body was still in recovery, the aftermath of months of chemical sabotage. But that night, I stood straighter than I had in years. As we approached the front entrance, the maitre d' announced us like a stage cue. Mr. Victor Morales and Mrs. Caroline Weber. I could feel the room shift as I walked in. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the pianist played a wrong note. I made my way to our table without rushing, without smiling too much, without betraying even a flicker of weakness. James stood, visibly rattled. "Mother," I nodded. "James." "Rebecca. Thank you for arranging this lovely event." Rebecca's eyes darted from me to Victor, confusion twisting her perfect brow. You're looking well." "Amazing what proper medication can do," I replied smoothly. During the first course, I laughed with Carrington's people, gently corrected an architecture critic who misquoted a detail from my riverfront project, accepted compliments with modest nods, all while watching James mentally scramble to make sense of my presence. By dessert, he could barely sit still. He clinked his glass for attention. "I have an announcement," he said, face tight. "As of next month, I'll be a partner at Westridge Development." Polite applause, hollow smiles. Then I stood. "Congratulations, James," I said. "And now, if you'll allow me, I also have something to share." The double doors opened. Carrington's team moved into place. Elizabeth Chen stepped forward with a discreet leather portfolio. Waitstaff appeared at every table with elegant presentation folders. "I'm proud to announce the launch of the Urban Hub," I said. "A $120 million development initiative based on architectural designs, created over 40 years ago and refined for today's needs." Gasps. Murmurs. Rebecca froze, champagne glass mid-air. "And equally exciting," I continued, "is the creation of the Weber Foundation for Young Architects, an educational non-profit that now legally owns my residence." James blinked. "What?" Elizabeth handed him the documents. "Ownership was transferred last month," I said, "and filed with the Secretary of State. Irrevocable." His hands trembled as he skimmed the pages. "This is absurd," he muttered. "My mother's been confused for months. Ask her doctor." "Dr. Harrison is currently under review by the medical board," Elizabeth replied calmly. "He's cooperating extensively." Rebecca leaned away from him, almost instinctively. "Martha has also provided statements," Elizabeth added. regarding medication changes, pill disposal, witnessed conversations. James turned red. That interfering. Careful, I said softly. Your position is already precarious. Rebecca made a move to stand. I need the restroom. Elizabeth nodded to a female officer. We'll escort you. The unraveling began. Guests slipped out. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. James stood alone in a collapsing facade, while I sat, serene, at the head of the table. Academic debate phrase? This moment underscores the performative fragility of social capital when faced with structural exposure. Translation: if you build a life on lies, don't be surprised when the walls fall down. After the Palmer Club dinner imploded, the fallout spread faster than wildfire through a dry canyon. The next morning, headlines hadn't hit the papers yet, but the real damage was already done in whispers, in pulled invitations, in cancelled meetings. You could practically hear the sound of bridges burning, one designer loafer at a time. James and Rebecca were toast, and not the artisanal, avocado-covered kind. Westridge Development postponed his partnership announcement. The Carrington people, bless them, made a few discreet calls to local developers that ensured neither of them would be touching a real estate project in Chicago anytime soon. Social standing evaporates quickly when your last name gets mentioned alongside investigation. Financial abuse and attempted murder in the same sentence. I returned to Victor's penthouse late that night, exhausted but oddly lighter, like I'd just finished dismantling a crumbling cathedral brick by brick, and now all that remained was open space and silence. Victor poured 2 glasses of wine and asked gently, "How does it feel?" I sat, smoothing the folds of my crimson dress across my lap, like I've just pulled myself out of wet concrete. That evening, Martha came in holding a box. "What's this?" I asked. She grinned. "Your trophies." Inside were all the pills I hadn't taken, all the dosage notes she'd recorded, all the video logs carefully backed up. "The originals," she said, "in case someone ever tries to rewrite the story." And oh, how they tried. Rebecca's lawyers were first. They reached out with a statement, something about confusion under emotional duress and misinterpreted conversations. They even threw in early menopause as a possible factor in her poor judgment. I rolled my eyes so hard I practically gave myself vertigo. James, for his part, went silent, which wasn't surprising. When cornered, he didn't lash out, he waited. Calculated, watched for an opening. I knew he wasn't done yet. Old age wisdom. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's just a reloading phase. But the next few weeks moved in my favor. Elizabeth Chen formally filed charges: financial elder abuse, medical manipulation, conspiracy. The media dubbed it the Weber case. And Architectural Digest even ran a quiet piece titled Blueprints and Betrayals, which was either tragic or on the nose, depending on your mood. And amid the chaos, the Weber Foundation began to breathe. We hired our first program director, created a scholarship application, transformed my once battleground of a home into something new. The kitchen was turned into a communal gathering space. The formal dining room, where James used to hover with my evening pills, became a lecture hall. The studio, yes, the same one Rebecca wanted to turn into her dream closet, was now a fully equipped design lab. It was poetry. No, better. It was justice with functional lighting. Michael Donovan officially joined the foundation as head of security and compliance. He looked better in casual clothes than he did in his former detective gear. Less stiff, more human. He once told me the case reminded him of his late mother, who had been similarly manipulated before she passed. I didn't ask for details. Some things you let sit quietly. Quirky fact? The human nose can detect over 1 trillion scents. Yet somehow, Betrayal has only one afternoon. While reviewing designs for the first urban hub location, Victor interrupted me with a cautious knock. "There's someone downstairs asking to speak with you." I glanced up from the model. "Is it James?" "No," he said. "It's a journalist. Chicago Tribune." I sighed. "Give me 5 minutes. I need lipstick and emotional armor." The interview was short. The journalist asked if I had any comment on my son's legal situation. I gave her the soundbite I'd been practicing. "My son made his choices. The courts will decide the consequences." I'm focused on building, not tearing down. Later that night, Victor clinked his glass against mine. To survival, he said. To purpose, I corrected. Because it wasn't just about what I'd endured, it was about what I would leave behind. The house was no longer just mine. It was a sanctuary for students. Dreamers? Future architects with no inheritance but ambition. And me. I wasn't fragile anymore. I was tempered, like steel forged under pressure. Academic debate phrase. Transformational justice emphasizes the role of agency and reinvention in the post-trauma identity narrative. Translation. You don't just heal, you rebuild. Around mid-June, Elizabeth Chen sent word. The financial audits were complete. James had funneled just over $2, $1 million into accounts across the Bahamas, Belize, and Luxembourg. Every penny frozen. Dr. Harrison, already stripped of his license, cooperating, reluctantly. Apparently, he had a pattern. 3 other elderly clients with suspicious medication changes and natural deaths all had family members who walked away richer. None had left behind quite as much surveillance as I had. I told Elizabeth I wanted to be present for the plea deal negotiations, not because I needed revenge, but because I wanted to witness the shift, the part where they stopped pretending and started confessing. But until then, I kept designing. The Urban Hub project had already broken ground on its first building, a community center, with integrated social services and green space. Victor and I worked side by side most days, sketching, tweaking, laughing over terrible city permits. He was familiar, not romantic. Not exactly, but comfortable. A warm light in the kitchen, a second cup of tea on my desk. He didn't need me to shrink or soften or sit down. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd stayed together? I asked one evening. Sometimes, he said, but mostly I think about what we can do now. That was enough. As the days stretched into summer, I slept better. The tremors lessened. My mind cleared. I started walking farther each day, even took a solo stroll down the lakefront. I passed a mother pushing a stroller, her partner close behind, carrying a sippy cup and talking about taxes. They looked tired, but whole. I let myself feel a pang, not of jealousy, but of recognition. I had loved my son, truly, completely, but I had also let that love blind me. Not anymore. Now, I loved wisely, with clear eyes and a very good security system. July arrived heavy and slow, like the deep breath before a thunderstorm. But instead of rain, it brought lawyers. Elizabeth Chen invited me to her office downtown, a sleek suite lined with law books and sunlight. She looked sharp as ever, wearing a charcoal blazer and the kind of heels that could double as weapons. We're ready to move forward with plea deal offers, she said, placing 3 folders on the desk. Each one had a name on the tab. James Weber, Rebecca Weber, Dr. Alan Harrison. I didn't touch them. What's the play? I asked, keeping my voice level. Maximum pressure, Elizabeth replied. Let them know what we have. Offer the deal. If they reject it, we go to trial. Simple. Nothing about this has been simple, I said. She nodded. But you've done the hard part, the smart part. I finally opened James's folder. 8 years. Eligible for parole after 5. Rebecca's deal. 3 years. Parole in 18 months. Harrison. 6 years and permanent license revocation. Old age wisdom. Justice is never symmetrical. You don't always get what's fair. You get what's provable. Victor was waiting for me outside, parked in front of the courthouse in his weathered black sedan. When I slid into the passenger seat, he handed me a to-go cup. Lemon tea, no sedatives, he said dryly. Pity, I murmured, sipping it. I could use something stronger. We drove in silence for a while. Lake Michigan, a glittering blur outside the window. Then Victor spoke. You're quiet. I'm tired. Of what? The process. No, I said. I'm tired of still thinking about James. And I was tired of dreaming about the little boy who used to tug at my pant leg while I sketched staircases. Tired of remembering the teen who built me a flower box from scrap wood. Tired of missing someone who no longer existed. That evening, back at Victor's penthouse, my home now, At least temporarily, I found a letter waiting on the front table. The handwriting stopped me cold. James. It was the first thing I'd received from him directly since the Palmer Club confrontation. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages long, full of the usual word soup. Misunderstood, pressured, never good enough. You always loved your work more than me. No apology, no ownership. Just one closing line. You won't die in prison, Mom, but you'll die alone. Quirky fact. In 1974, a man built a full replica of the Taj Mahal in his backyard for his wife using scrap marble and leftover rebar. It collapsed in a week. Apparently, love alone isn't a strong enough foundation. I folded the letter, walked into the kitchen, and lit it over the gas stove, watched the flames curl the edges, blacken his name, and leave only smoke. The next morning, the Carrington team held a small reception to celebrate Phase 2 of the Urban Hub project. I arrived in a slate blue dress and low boots, comfortable enough to walk, stylish enough to remind people I wasn't going anywhere. The reception was warm, modest, full of laughter and sketches and that buzz you get when people actually believe in the work you're doing. Carrington raised a toast to Caroline Weber, who continues to redefine what legacy really means. I smiled, nodded, accepted the applause, but my mind was somewhere else, back in my old house. At that hallway, where I first overheard Rebecca's fatal birthday wish, it felt like a movie now, distant, almost fictional, and then, like fate was listening, Rebecca's attorney called. She's accepted the plea, he said flatly, wants to serve time quietly. She's moving out of state after no farewell brunch, I asked. He didn't laugh. Later, Martha and I walked through the Foundation's headquarters, what was once my home. She stopped in front of a bookshelf in the library. They put your first blueprint sketch in a frame, she said. I looked at it. Faded paper, pencil lines steady despite age. It belongs here, I said. Martha nodded. So do you, academic debate phrase? Legacy, as a social construct, transcends biological lineage and instead becomes rooted in institutional impact and collective memory. Translation: blood doesn't define who carries your name forward. Actions do. That night, Victor brought home takeout and a movie. We watched Rear Window fitting. Right. Halfway through, he turned to me. When this is all over, what do you want? I considered that. Not revenge, not restitution. Quiet mornings, purposeful work, windows that face the sun. And James, he asked softly. There's nothing left to fix, I said. Some buildings collapse from the inside. You can't rebuild on that. After he fell asleep, I returned to my drafting table. The new urban hub design sat before me, clean lines, shared spaces, solar-roofed co-ops. A better future built by people who'd been underestimated. People like me. The morning of James's sentencing, the city woke in a fog, a thick, moody haze that dulled the edges of buildings and made Lake Michigan look like polished steel. I watched it from Victor's penthouse window, wrapped in one of his oversized cardigans. There was something fitting about it, Chicago in grayscale, quiet and unsure. Just like me, courtrooms aren't like they are in TV shows. No dramatic gavel bangs, no sudden outbursts, just fluorescent lighting, neutral walls, and a quiet ticking sound that might have been a clock, or maybe just the sound of people bracing for what comes next. James wore a suit that no longer fit. His tie was crooked. He looked tired, less like a villain, more like a man who'd been found out. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The judge accepted the plea deal. 8 years for James, with parole eligibility after 5. Rebecca had already begun her sentence 2 weeks earlier. Dr. Harrison's agreement was still pending, but his license had already been revoked. His practice shut down, his face now showing up on medical ethics panels as a cautionary tale. I walked out of that courtroom with steady steps, not triumphant, just certain. Victor met me outside. Well, it's done, I said. Old age wisdom. Closure doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like a door clicking shut. That afternoon, I visited the house, my house now fully transformed into the Weber Foundation's headquarters. I hadn't seen it since the construction crew finished the final phase. It was beautiful. The old dining room, Now a glass-walled lecture space with a projector and ergonomic chairs. The upstairs guest rooms had been converted into temporary housing for out-of-state fellows. And my studio, my beloved studio, was better than I'd ever dreamed. 3D printers, soundproof walls, skylights that actually opened. Martha stood waiting at the door. She wore a new name badge, Director of Operations. "You ready?" she asked. "For what? The rest of your life?" She smiled. We walked through the halls like museum curators. Students bustled quietly in the background, some sketching, others debating modernism versus postmodernism in low, passionate tones. Quirky fact: the Guggenheim Museum in New York had over 700 design drafts before the final version was approved. Sometimes the right version takes time, and a few disasters along the way. At the far end of the foundation's atrium hung a plaque, the Weber Foundation for Young Architects, in honor of the structures we build when no one believes in us. I stood there a while, not because I was emotional, though I was, but because I finally understood something I'd ignored for too long. This wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about utility. My survival had to do something. My pain needed to build. Otherwise, it was just rubble. That night, Victor hosted a small celebration dinner at his lakefront apartment. Not a party, just a quiet evening. Close friends, Carrington's team, a few of the young architects who had already been accepted into the first cohort. Martha brought a bottle of champagne someone had saved from a project launched 20 years ago. We popped it on the balcony. "I always thought I'd spend my last years in a rocking chair," I said, sipping slowly. "And now?" Victor asked. "Now I think I'll die with blueprints in my hand." He smiled. After dinner, I sat at the drafting table Victor had set up for me in his guest library. Same dimensions as my old one, same angle, same light. And I sketched. Not a building this time. Not an urban plan. I sketched a letter. To James. I didn't send it. Probably never will. But I needed to draw the lines. Needed to put shape to the final thing I would ever give him. My goodbye. "James, I loved you. I still remember the weight of you in my arms the day you were born. I wanted to build the world around you. I never wanted to be a shadow over your name. I wanted to be your structure, your support. But love can't survive lies. And I won't be rebuilt by the person who tried to erase me. I hope you learn something. I hope you stop hurting people. But that journey isn't mine to witness anymore. Goodbye." I tore the page from the pad and placed it in the drawer, not to be burned, just filed. Like the final draft of a project I would never submit. Academic debate phrase, parental disownment, while legally and emotionally complex, can serve as a necessary boundary in cases where generational abuse reoccurs as financial exploitation. Translation: sometimes you have to let go of your own child to keep yourself alive. That night, as the city exhaled around me, I thought of all the women I'd met at award ceremonies, industry events, lectures, women who had achieved so much and still been quietly erased by family or legacy or illness. Women who, like me, built everything only to be told they were no longer useful. I made a quiet promise. They wouldn't be forgotten. We would build a place for them. A second chance for every blueprint they left unfinished. Summer rolled into September, golden light pooling in the corners of Victor's apartment like warm honey. My recovery had plateaued, not fully healed, but functional. The tremors in my right hand were less frequent now, though still noticeable when I overexerted or skipped lunch. I didn't mind them anymore. They were a reminder, a scar in motion. The Weber Foundation had officially launched its first full academic year, 20 students, 10 faculty mentors, 5 project grants, and 1 house. My house buzzing with the kind of energy only idealistic young architects can generate. Meanwhile, Urban Hub Phase 2 was gaining momentum. Carrington's team flew in from New York once a week, using my old studio for strategy sessions. Victor and I were back to our usual rhythm debates about design philosophy one minute, arguing over takeout menus the next. One afternoon, while reviewing structural renderings for the mixed-use tower, I noticed Victor was unusually quiet. "What?" I asked, not looking up. "You're different," he said. "Older, stronger." I chuckled. I was always strong. I just forgot. old age wisdom. Strength isn't about endurance. It's about recovery. It's about how you rebuild when the scaffolding falls. That night, I received an email from Elizabeth Chen, now recently appointed as a federal judge. She'd become somewhat of a regular in my life, part legal ally, part quietly protective guardian. Subject: Harrison. Update: we've opened investigations into 3 additional cases. Elderly patients, similar medication regimens, similar financial patterns. One family had suspected foul play, but never had enough proof. She attached scanned interviews, charts, highlighted comparisons between my symptoms and theirs. It was chilling. Familiar, validating, Victor read over my shoulder. You started something, he said. No, I finished something that should have ended a long time ago. But even as justice moved forward, the past had a funny way of knocking again. A week later, I returned home to find another letter waiting. From James. This one was different. Typed. Formal. Polite. He was eligible for parole next year. He wrote, he was participating in all the rehabilitation programs available. He'd found religion, written a memoir, attended a group therapy circle for sons of accomplished women. I laughed out loud at that one, loud enough to make Martha peek into the room. You okay? She asked. I think I just read the first chapter of fiction James has ever completed. I tossed the letter aside. I didn't burn this one, just left it on the counter next to a dying succulent that refused to thrive no matter how much indirect sunlight it received. Some things you just can't revive. Martha brewed us tea and sat across from me. You're really not going to respond? No, you're not even curious if he's changed. I thought about that for a moment. No, because even if he has, it's too late. I don't owe him access just because he got caught. Quirky fact. In Japanese kintsugi art, broken pottery is repaired with gold, celebrating the cracks instead of hiding them, but only when the broken pieces are asked to come back together. Consent matters, even in ceramics. October arrived with a brisk wind that made the lake look restless. At the foundation, we held a midterm exhibition for our scholars. They presented models, sketches, even VR renderings. One student, Mia, had reimagined my urban hub concept into a floating micro-village for climate-displaced communities. I pulled her aside afterward. Brilliant work. She beamed. I just kept thinking about how to protect people when their homes are failing. I understood that sentence in my bones. We gave her a grant the next day. Academic debate phrase. Design thinking in post-crisis architecture prioritizes adaptability, resilience, and emotional restoration over traditional aesthetics. Translation. Buildings aren't just for shelter anymore. They're for healing. Later that week, Carrington's sustainability director flew in to preview the latest phase of Urban Hub's development. The Community Wellness Center was gaining national attention, not just for its function, but for its elegance. It's beautiful and inclusive, she said. That rarely happens. Most of the time, accessibility looks like an afterthought. It shouldn't, I said. Beauty isn't exclusive. We toured the construction site together, and for the first time in months, I wore a hard hat again. My legs were slower, my vision not as sharp. But as I stood among steel beams and exposed rebar, I felt alive in a way I hadn't since my 40s. Victor snapped a photo of me looking up at the framework. You look like a queen surveying her kingdom, he joked. I feel like a project manager with permanent nerve damage, I replied. He grinned, still majestic. That evening, we walked along the lakefront, autumn's chill in the air. He slipped his arm through mine, not romantic, just steady. Any regrets? He asked softly. I considered it, only that I didn't make that call to you sooner, I said. He nodded, eyes on the dark water. Well, we have now, and that was true. Now mattered. Now was everything. I had lived long enough to see my name on something meaningful. I had survived long enough to make sure it couldn't be taken again. And I had designed a life that no one, not even my own son, could undo. By November, the wind had sharpened its edges. It blew in off Lake Michigan with the kind of bite that made scarves feel like survival gear. The city was preparing for its annual descent into winter, and I was preparing for something else. Legacy maintenance. Most people think legacies are grand. Sweeping things, statues, awards, a name etched on a building. But let me tell you something. Legacies are just daily maintenance, like keeping mold from creeping into the tile grout. That's what I was doing now, protecting the infrastructure. We'd had our first scholarship application cycle. Over 400 applicants for 20 spots. The committee was thrilled. The work was meaningful, intense, and frankly, more energizing than any project I'd taken on in decades. And there was something deeply poetic about knowing that my old house, was now filled with 20-year-olds arguing over cantilevers and material ethics. Martha, now director of operations, ran the place like a dream. Every time I visited, she walked me through the updates, new printers, new accessibility ramps, a meditation garden going in behind the kitchen patio. Rebecca had once planned to put a koi pond there. We planted herbs instead. Old age wisdom. Control isn't about keeping your hands on everything. It's about setting systems in place so the right people keep it going when you step away. Elizabeth Chen came by one Friday with an update. We sat in the conference room that used to be my sunroom. Harrison's officially pleaded guilty, she said. 6 years. He's naming names. Other patients. 3. All deceased. One family is considering a civil suit. I nodded slowly. Is it awful that I'm glad it wasn't just me? No, she said, without hesitation. It makes the pattern harder to deny. We sipped tea in silence for a bit. The good kind. Loose leaf. Brewed by students who still hadn't figured out how not to burn it. Then she handed me another envelope. You've got mail, she said with a smirk. I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. James, this one was shorter. 1 page. No manipulations. No memoir pictures. Just this. I'm up for parole next spring. I'm not asking for anything. Just thought you should know. I folded it neatly and placed it in my folder marked unresolved. Not everything needs a conclusion. Later that evening, Victor and I had dinner at a cozy little place near the foundation, one of those restaurants where the lighting's soft enough to make anyone look 10 years younger. You think he'll try to contact you again? Victor asked. Over grilled salmon and roasted squash. He already has, and I let the letter speak for itself. He nodded, wise. Quirky fact. In 18th century France, there was a law that required buildings on main streets to have a certain pleasing facade, regardless of the interior structure. Appearance over integrity. How familiar. I'd stopped pretending, stopped smiling for the comfort of others. I was no longer in the business of making people comfortable. I was in the business of making things true. And the truth was, James had tried to erase me, but I rebuilt. That week, I spent most mornings in the Urban Hub project office, reviewing the next phase affordable artist housing, community tech labs, and a green rooftop designed for both function and beauty. Our interns, bright-eyed and undercaffeinated, treated me like I was the ghost of genius past. One of them asked me what I thought about the latest generative design software. I told him, I think it's promising, but you still need a soul behind the machine. That got an awkward laugh. Academic debate phrase. The increasing use of AI in architectural design challenges traditional notions of authorship, sparking concerns about the dilution of human intentionality. Translation. Don't let robots design your grandma's kitchen unless your grandma's cool with it. I went home that night to Victor's apartment. I'd never officially moved in, but I had a drawer, a shelf in the bathroom, a mug I refused to let anyone else use. We didn't label it. That was the point. We weren't husband and wife. We were structural partners, 2 beams in parallel, holding up the same ceiling. You want to take that trip? He asked, flipping through a magazine that featured Urban Hub in a piece titled The Return of Caroline Weber. What trip? The one we talked about, Singapore. Tokyo, Barcelona, a tour of sustainable architecture projects around the world. I looked at him. I'm almost 77. You're also the healthiest, nearly poisoned woman I've ever met. I laughed. We'll need travel insurance. Done. That night, I lay in bed and thought about the girl I'd once been hungry, brilliant, terrified of being too much. Then the woman I became, overachieving, careful, resentful of how much space I'd taken up in rooms built for men. And now, I was finally the thing I'd always designed for everyone else. January 15th, 2024. 2 years to the day since Rebecca muttered her birthday wish. I hope this is her last one. Spoiler. It wasn't. Instead, I stood on the rooftop of the newest urban hub site, wrapped in a wool coat and watching a crane lower the final beam into place. The structure would house our hybrid community center mental health services on one floor, co-op workspace on the next, and subsidized housing up top. Function layered over compassion. Exactly how it should be. The ceremony was small, but meaningful. Carrington's team was there. So were a few foundation students, beaming like they'd just landed on the moon. Victor held a thermos of coffee in one gloved hand and gave me a look I'd come to know well, admiration, tinged with worry. "You sure you want to do this today?" he asked. I nodded. "It's time." He drove me to the minimum security facility an hour outside the city. The sky was grey, the radio low. Neither of us spoke much. The closer we got, the more air seemed to thicken around me, like the road itself was asking if I was sure. Old age wisdom. Confrontation doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just brings clarity. At check-in, the guard eyed me curiously. "You're here for inmate Weber." "I am." I left my coat and bag in the locker, walked into the visitors area. Beige walls, plastic chairs, a vending machine that hummed with a kind of institutional loneliness. James walked in moments later, thinner, paler, but still himself. He wore the khaki uniform like a costume he hadn't quite accepted yet. "Mother," he said, sitting across from me. "This is unexpected. Is it?" He smiled weakly. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I told your attorney I would." Silence. Then, finally, he asked, "Why now?" I studied his face. Still handsome. Still my son. Still a stranger. "Because I'm moving forward," I said. "And I needed to make sure I wasn't dragging you with me." His jaw tightened. "I've changed." "Have you?" "I've completed every program they've offered. Written a book. Met with a chaplain weekly. I'm not the same man who hurt you. You were never the same man I thought you were." That landed harder than I intended. He flinched. "You'll be eligible for parole soon," I said. "What do you plan to do?" "Start over. Somewhere quiet. I'm not asking for money. You couldn't get it if you tried." He looked away. There was a beat of silence that felt too heavy for the room. "You never understood what it was like," he said suddenly. "Growing up with you. The spotlight. The expectations. You were larger than life. And I was always the footnote. I never meant for that to happen. But it did happen." I nodded. "And instead of building something of your own, you tried to erase me. I wanted space. You could have had it. You could have waited. You could have built your own life. But you chose to dismantle mine instead. Quirky fact. Bamboo grows so fast, it can add over 3 feet in a single day. But it takes years of underground root work before that growth ever appears. Maybe James thought he could skip the roots, just grow upward, instantly. He ran a hand through his graying hair. "You really came here just to say that?" "No," I said. "I came to say goodbye." He looked up. "I'm leaving next month. A 3-month architectural tour. Singapore, Tokyo, Barcelona. I'm reviewing international projects for the next urban hub phase." His eyes narrowed slightly. "So you're here in case something happens to you?" I smiled. "Nothing's going to happen to me. But you're updating your will. There's nothing left in it for you." He blinked, slowly. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to understand that we're done. I'm not your mother anymore. Not in any way that matters." He exhaled shakily. "That's final." "It is." Academic debate phrase. The dissolution of familial bonds, while socially controversial, becomes ethically necessary in cases of sustained harm without accountability. Translation. Blood doesn't make you family. Behavior does. James leaned forward. "I found God. You know, I pray every day. I hope you find peace." "James, but that's your path." "Not mine." I stood, collected my coat, and walked out without looking back. Victor waited outside, didn't ask how it went. We drove in silence until we crossed the city line. Then he said, "Are you okay?" "I think so." "Want to talk about it?" "No." He nodded. "Want a sandwich?" I laughed. desperately. Back at home, we shared roast beef sandwiches on rye and watched the sun disappear behind the skyline. The buildings I'd once designed now looked like old friends, some standing taller than I remembered, others softened by time. And me, I wasn't healed, but I was whole. Spring came late in 2024. The lake remained cold and unreadable, but small green shoots began pushing through the soil around the Weber Foundation gardens, proof that something could grow even after a hard freeze. It had been 2 years since I started collecting evidence with Martha and Michael. 2 years since I had to relearn how to walk with intention, how to speak with strength, how to remember that survival is not the same thing as living. But today I was living. The Weber Foundation was thriving. Our second cohort of architecture scholars had moved into the house. Mia, the student who had pitched the floating climate village, had just received a city grant to test a prototype in a coastal Louisiana township. Victor and I called it Floating Hope, though she had named it something far more scientific and millennial-sounding. Every week brought more progress, more proposals, more blueprints, more young architects who cared more about function than fame. It was exactly the kind of community I had dreamed of decades ago when Victor and I first started sketching the urban hub concept on cocktail napkins in dimly lit cafes. Victor was still beside me, not a husband, not a boyfriend, not even a label, just there. My constant, my co-conspirator in life's second act. One afternoon, I stood at the center of our latest urban hub site, Phase 3, the largest yet. 4 city blocks of integrated housing, sustainable marketplaces, and rooftop green spaces. We'd secured backing from an international coalition, thanks in part to the media coverage of my so-called revival. They called it a comeback. I called it a correcting. Carrington himself raised a toast at the construction kickoff to Caroline Weber, whose clarity of vision is matched only by the strength of her resolve. I offered him a small smile. I had never cared for speeches, but I understood the utility of them. And here's your quirky fact. A single honeybee can visit over 5 owls and flowers in one day. That's one tiny body doing the work of an army. Sometimes, one person really can make a difference. Back at Victor's penthouse that evening, where I still technically lived, though I'd begun designing my own space again, I found a package on the entry table. No return address. Just a manila envelope, thick and sealed with black tape. Inside, James's manuscript, his memoir, Toxic Blueprints. Growing up in the shadow of a legend, the goal. I thumbed through it. The writing was passable. The tone was rehearsed, full of self-pity and thin apologies wrapped in performative reflection. But the story wasn't about me. It was about him, his pain, his struggle, his desperate need to be seen. There was a chapter about the Palmer Club dinner. He'd titled it, The Night My Mother Died and Rose Again. Dramatic. Inaccurate. But I'll give him this. At least he recognized that I didn't stay buried. Old age wisdom. Memoirs are often less about truth and more about justification. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I simply placed the manuscript on a high shelf and turned back to the plans for my new home. It was a lakeside house glass, steel and warm wood. 1 level, no stairs, floor-to-ceiling windows, a central atrium filled with natural light. It had space for guests, space for solitude, and a drafting table custom-built for my back and shoulders. Martha teased me. "Did you design your own fortress?" "No," I said. "I designed a sanctuary." Academic debate phrase. Post-traumatic design reflects a nuanced understanding of space, not just as shelter, but as psychological anchoring. Translation. Sometimes a house needs to hug you back. The project broke ground in June. Victor joked that he'd send me flowers on move-in day, even though I'd be a 10-minute walk away. "You sure you want to live alone again?" he asked. "Absolutely. Not even scared. Terrified." I smiled. But good terrified. The house would be complete in early fall. In the meantime, I kept busy, kept moving, kept building, and the truth is, I was never alone. The foundation students checked in often. Michael stopped by for coffee twice a week. Martha had taken up watercolors and insisted on showing me every flower she painted. And Victor? He was always there when I needed him, and never when I didn't. We were partners, plain and simple. One night in July, after a long day of reviewing grant proposals, Victor handed me a glass of wine on the balcony. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked. "All the time." "Do you regret it?" "Only parts." "Which part the most?" "That I thought survival meant staying quiet," I said. "That I let James narrate my life while I was still alive." Victor nodded. "Quiet." Then he said, "Well, you've reclaimed the pen." And I had. That week, Carrington published a piece in Architectural Record titled "The Woman Who Outbuilt Betrayal." I didn't love the headline. It was a bit on the nose, but the message was clear. I was no longer Caroline Webber, mother of. I was simply Caroline Webber, architect, founder, survivor. September 12th, 2024, my new home stood complete. It rose from the lakeside like a statement, not loud, but definite, a single-story modernist structure, designed with light, air, and freedom in mind. No sharp corners, no excess, just clean lines and quiet power. The atrium roof filtered morning sun like a cathedral window. My drafting table sat beneath it, waiting, patient and familiar. Moving in was a soft affair. No grand boxes or champagne toasts. Just Martha dropping off my tea kettle. Michael carrying the one piece of furniture I refused to part with, a walnut bench my sister Elaine gave me decades ago, and Victor setting up my printer like it was sacred technology. They left before sunset, giving me space to breathe it in. I stood in the center of my studio, alone, alive. It didn't feel empty. That night, I sat on the back deck with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a mug of ginger tea warming my palms. The lake moved softly. Cicadas buzzed somewhere in the reeds, and from the foundation, just a few blocks away, I could almost hear students laughing over pizza and deadlines. They were mine not by blood, but by choice. Old age wisdom. Chosen family will walk you home, even when the blood kind locks the door behind you. A few days later, I received an invitation to speak at a symposium in Barcelona, part of an international conference on post-trauma design. Victor would be attending too, presenting our urban hub project as a model for ethical urban planning. "You ready for another plane?" he asked, reading the itinerary. "I never really landed," I said. Quirky fact. In 1904, a woman named Emily Warren Roebling completed the Brooklyn Bridge after her husband fell ill. She wasn't credited for decades, but the bridge still stands. Legacies outlast footnotes. A week before our trip, I stood on the terrace of my new home and watched the sunset melt into the lake. In the glass walls behind me, I caught a reflection, silver-haired, poised, her hand steady as she raised a cup of tea to her lips. I barely recognized the woman I'd been 2 years ago. That quiet, dimmed-down version of myself. That shadow, she was gone now, folded gently into memory. Where all ruins belong. Victor arrived just after dusk, with takeout and news. "Rebecca's up for parole next summer," he said. I didn't flinch. Let her be someone else's problem. She's shopping her story to publishers, positioning herself as survivor of manipulation. Oh, I let that sit in the air, then shrugged. Let her talk. I've got the blueprints. And I did. The third urban hub building was already under construction. Our team was exploring modular expansion to rural zones. The foundation had secured funding through its first endowment campaign. We'd even started a mentorship program for older women re-entering the workforce. There was no need for revenge anymore. Only forward momentum. Academic debate phrase. Redemption arcs may satisfy narrative cravings, but sustainable justice prioritizes accountability without spectacle. Translation. I didn't need to clap back. I just needed to build on. 3 nights before the trip, I received a final letter from James. Typed, short. I understand. I truly do. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted to say thank you for not letting me destroy you. It showed me what I could have been. I didn't burn it. I didn't respond either. I simply slid it into a drawer marked closure and walked back to my drafting table. There were new lives to design, new spaces to carve, new blueprints that would carry my name not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. And so, on September 30th, I stood at the helm of the Urban Hub presentation in Barcelona, my voice steady as I outlined the design's integration of trauma-informed care with sustainable infrastructure. They applauded, not because I'd survived, but because I'd contributed. That night, Victor and I walked along the Catalonian coast, gelato in hand, the stars scattered across the Mediterranean sky. "You look content," he said. "I am. You think you'll ever write your own memoir?" he asked. I smiled. "Why, I already lived it." The next morning, I sat on the hotel balcony with coffee, my sketchpad open. I drew something small, simply. A cottage. Just one room, but with good bones. And that's where we'll end tonight. Thank you for spending this evening with me. As the wind settles and the night folds in, let me leave you with this thought. The structures we build, be they homes, habits, or healing, are more than concrete and steel. They're choices, boundaries, blueprints of who we choose to become after the collapse. 2 years ago, I was almost erased by those I trusted most, not loudly, quietly, elegantly, like the careful removal of an old foundation, hoping no one would notice the house start to tilt. But I noticed, and then I rebuilt. My hands still tremble sometimes. My energy comes in waves. But each day, I rise with purpose and put pencil to paper, not to rewrite what happened, but to draw what comes next. This is your reminder. Friend, it's never too late. Not for truth, not for strength, and certainly not for design. So wherever you are, whatever you're facing, may you build with courage, stand with certainty, and never, ever let someone else draft your ending. Now, close your eyes, let the world soften, and sleep, knowing that your story is still yours to build.